He regretted his bride choice, until the blizzard of 1885 changed everything. The storm hit so fast the train never even screamed. One moment the tracks were there, iron veins cutting through white land, and the next the world disappeared in a roar of snow and wind, as if the frontier itself had decided to swallow everyone whole. And standing inside the shaking station, snow still clinging to his coat, Caleb Hart had one thought he couldn't outrun. I chose the wrong woman. If this story grips you from the first breath of cold, stay with us. Because what begins in regret will be rewritten by fire, survival, and a blizzard that refuses to let anyone remain unseen. The station was small. Too small. Wooden walls creaked under the assault of the wind, every gust slamming sideways like it meant to break in. Snow hissed against the windows, filling the cracks, erasing the outside world inch by inch. Caleb stood near the door, tall and rigid, hands flexing at his sides. He didn't remove his gloves. Didn't unbutton his coat. As if staying ready might somehow undo the choice he'd already made. Across the room, on a narrow bench worn smooth by decades of waiting, his wife sat quietly. She kept her hands folded in her lap, fingers laced tightly, knuckles pale. Her dress was clean but thin, mended carefully at the elbows. Her boots were scuffed, the kind worn by someone who walked because there was no other option. She lifted her eyes toward him once. Just once. Then lowered them again like she already knew what she would find. Caleb swallowed. He had imagined this differently. He'd imagined certainty. A sense of rightness settling into his chest the moment he met her. Instead, the feeling sitting there now was heavy and wrong, pressing against his ribs like a truth he didn't want. The marriage had been arranged for practical reasons. His ranch needed a woman. Someone to cook, keep house, bring order to a life built on land in long winters. Love had never been promised. Still, this wasn't what he'd pictured. The station door burst open, slamming hard enough to rattle the stove. The station master staggered inside, beard crusted white, breath sharp. "That's it," he said grimly. "Tracks are gone. Roads too. No trains tonight. Maybe not tomorrow. You'll be lucky to make it 10 feet outside." The door slammed shut again, the wind screaming like it disagreed. Just like that, the world narrowed. Two strangers. Bound by paper vows. Trapped by nature. She drew her shawl tighter around her shoulders. It did almost nothing. She didn't complain. Didn't ask questions. Just endured. Minutes passed. Maybe longer. I can help," she said finally, her voice soft but steady. "If there's something that needs doing." Caleb's first reaction was irritation. Not at her, at himself. At the way her quiet effort made him feel exposed. "There's nothing to do," he said shortly. Then, seeing her flinch, he exhaled. "We wait." She nodded immediately. No argument. No resentment. As if waiting was something she'd practiced all her life. The stove glowed weakly. Caleb fed it more wood, movements practiced, efficient. Cold didn't scare him. He'd survived harsher winters than this. What unsettled him was the way she watched the fire, not with boredom but with careful attention. Like warmth was a privilege that might disappear if she looked away. Hours dragged. Hunger crept in. The station master shared what little food he had before retreating to the back room. Soon it was just the two of them again, the storm screaming like it meant to listen. She stood slowly. "I could make something warm," she offered. "If you'd like." He hesitated, then nodded. She worked quietly, carefully, using scraps like they mattered. Her hands trembled, not clumsy, just nervous. When she handed him the bowl, she didn't look up. Braced. Caleb took it. The food was plain. But it was warm. Something shifted. Small. Almost invisible. Like ice cracking underfoot. "You grew up on the frontier?" he asked, surprising them both. She nodded. "My family didn't have much. I learned to endure." The word lingered. Sleep came in fragments. Each time the wind slammed the walls, she startled awake, fingers clutching her shawl like it might vanish if she let go. Caleb noticed. From his place near the stove, he watched the way she shivered even when the fire burned hot. How she sat straight despite exhaustion, as if relaxing might invite rejection. "You should sleep closer to the stove," he said finally. She looked up quickly. I don't want to take your place." "It's warm," he replied. "You need it." She obeyed, carefully, settling near the fire without touching him. Like a cautious animal testing new ground. After midnight the storm worsened. The station master burst in again, panic sharp in his eyes. "Snow's burying the doors. If this keeps up, we ration heat. We could be stuck till morning. Maybe longer." Her hands clenched. "I don't do well being unwanted," she whispered. The words hit harder than any accusation. Caleb turned fully toward her. I didn't say you were unwanted. You didn't have to, she replied. Silence pressed in. I made a choice with my head, he said finally. Not my heart. That doesn't make you the mistake. She looked up, stunned. It makes me one. The wind slammed the window so hard she gasped, her hand lifting instinctively, then freezing, embarrassed by her fear. Caleb stepped closer without thinking and wrapped his coat around her shoulders. Slow. Careful. You're safe, he said. As long as I'm here. Her breath hitched. Thank you. They sat close but not touching, warmth shared by agreement rather than accident. Outside the blizzard raged on. And somewhere in that endless night, Caleb realized something that frightened him more than the storm. He no longer regretted being trapped. He only regretted how easily he had almost overlooked her. If this story is already pulling you in, subscribe to the channel. Stories like this don't rush love, they let it earn its place. Morning did not arrive with light. It arrived with silence. The kind so deep it felt unnatural, like the world was holding its breath after screaming all night. Caleb woke before he meant to, muscles stiff, senses alert, expecting another violent gust to slam the walls. But none came. The blizzard had exhausted itself. Gray light filtered weakly through snow-choked windows, revealing the full damage. Snow pressed shoulder-high against the walls. The door was sealed shut from the outside, buried as if the station had been swallowed whole. And leaning against his shoulder, asleep for the first time since they'd arrived, his wife did not stir. Caleb froze. At some point in the night, exhaustion had claimed her. She had slumped sideways, head resting lightly against him, breath shallow but steady. One hand curled unconsciously in the fabric of his coat, as if even in sleep she feared warmth might disappear that he didn't move. Not when his arm went numb. Not when the fire dimmed. Not even when the cold crept back in. Because for the first time since meeting her, she looked peaceful. When she stirred at last, she jerked upright, instantly mortified. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. You didn't do anything wrong, he said quickly. She paused, studying his face like she was checking for a trick. Then her shoulders loosened just slightly. Relief quiet but real. The station master emerged from the back room, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Storms passed, he said. But don't get hopeful. Roads are buried. Tracks too. Could be another day. Maybe two. Another day. The words would have filled Caleb with dread yesterday. Now they felt like time. Dangerous, fragile time. They rationed what little food remained. Caleb pushed more toward her plate without comment. She noticed anyway. You'll need strength, she protested softly. So will you, he replied, then added awkwardly, and I'm bigger. The corner of her mouth twitched before she could stop it. It was the first hint of a smile he'd seen. To keep warm they worked. Snow had forced its way through cracks in the walls overnight. Caleb shoveled it out with his hands, breath fogging the air. She found a torn blanket in a forgotten drawer and set about mending it with needle and thread, fingers moving quickly, practiced. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. Survival has a way of stripping conversation down to what matters. Their movements began to align without discussion. He cleared space. She sealed drafts. He stacked wood. She repaired cloth. Partners before either of them dared name it. By midday the wind returned. Not with the same fury, but enough to remind them the storm wasn't finished. The building shuddered. A sharp crack echoed through the room. A window pane split. Cold poured in like a living thing. Without thinking, Caleb crossed the room and braced the window with his body while she scrambled for boards. Her shawl slipped, hair tumbling loose as she worked. Hold it there, she said, breathless. I am. You're bleeding. He glanced down. A thin line of red traced his knuckles. I'll live. She huffed softly. You frontier men and your confidence in bleeding. Despite himself, he smiled. They sealed the gap together, fingers numb, breath mingling. When the draft finally stopped, they stood close, chest heaving, faces flushed from cold and effort. Thank you, she said, eyes bright with adrenaline. You're quicker than you look. And you're heavier, she replied without thinking, then froze. I mean because the wind? He laughed. Actually laughed. The sound surprised them both. They retreated to the stove, closer now by necessity. The quiet between them felt different. Not heavy. Companionable. I didn't expect you to be kind, she said suddenly. He frowned slightly. Why not? She shrugged, gaze fixed on the fire. Men who choose out of necessity usually keep distance. He considered that. I've kept distance most of my life. Because it's safer? Because disappointment hurts. She looked at him then, really looked. You sound like someone who's been disappointed often. Enough, he said. Then after a pause, by myself most of all. She nodded slowly. Recognition, not pity. The afternoon dragged. Hunger pressed again. The station master shared grim news. Several settlements were cut off. People stranded across the region, waiting on mercy. As the light faded, they talked more. Small things at first. Weather. Land. Chores. Then larger truths slipped through when neither of them guarded the door. She spoke of her family. Of losing her mother young. Of being told she was useful, practical, never beautiful, never chosen. When she finished, she stared at the floor, braced. Caleb said nothing for a long moment. Then quietly, you endured more than most. That doesn't make me special, she replied. No, he said. It makes you strong. She swallowed. Night fell again. The temperature dropped dangerously low. The stove struggled. Caleb fed it the last of the wood. They sat under the mended blanket, shoulders touching now. No apology. No explanation. Outside the wind howled, but weaker. I thought I'd ruined both our lives, he said suddenly. She turned to him. By marrying me? By choosing without care, he corrected. Thinking survival was enough. And now? He hesitated. Honesty mattered now. Now I think survival is only the beginning. Her voice was steady. I never expected love. Only safety. Respect. You deserve more than what you expect. The words surprised them both. Later, when sleep claimed them again, it came without fear. They lay back to back, warmth shared by agreement rather than accident. Caleb stared into the dark, listening to the storm soften, and understood something essential. Regret had been easy. It required nothing. Care required action. By morning, the blizzard loosened its grip. When the doors finally opened, Caleb knew he would no longer see her as a consequence of necessity, but as a choice. Morning arrived without drama. No wind. No howl. No violence. Just silence so deep it felt like the land itself was resting after a long, brutal fight. Caleb woke slowly, disoriented by the stillness. For days now, sound had meant danger. Wind meant cold. Noise meant threat. But now, there was nothing. Only the faint crackle of dying embers and the soft rhythm of another person breathing nearby. He turned his head. She was awake. Sitting close to the stove, shawl wrapped around her shoulders, hair loosely braided over one shoulder as if she'd done it without thinking. The firelight painted her face in soft gold, smoothing the sharp edges hunger and fear had carved into her the night before. She looked steady. Not hopeful exactly. Not waiting. Just present. The storm's done, he said quietly, unsure why his voice felt so loud. She nodded. I noticed. They shared a small smile. The kind that didn't need explanation. The station master emerged soon after, already pulling on his coat. Road crews working their way through. Won't be quick, but you'll get out today. By midday if the weather holds. Caleb felt the words settle between them like weight. You'll get out. Not we'll survive. Not you're stuck. This was different. They packed slowly. Neither of them rushed. There was no urgency now, and somehow that made every movement heavier. The blanket she'd mended was folded carefully, hands lingering on the fabric as if it held memory. Caleb shrugged into his coat, the same one she'd slept wrapped in, and hesitated before buttoning it. Outside the world looked unreal. Snow stretched endlessly, smooth and untouched, sunlight glinting off the drifts like glass. The tracks were gone, the horizon erased. The storm hadn't just passed, it had rewritten the land. She stepped outside beside him, breath catching softly. It's beautiful. Dangerous, he corrected out of habit. She glanced at him. Both things can be true. That gave him pause. The wagon arrived near midday, pulled by two exhausted horses, the driver bundled against the cold. Caleb helped her up first, adjusting the blanket around her shoulders without thinking. She noticed. Didn't pull away. The ride to the ranch was long and quiet. The land bore scars, broken fences, half-buried markers, paths lost beneath snow, but it was familiar to him. Solid. Real. He found himself watching her instead of the horizon. She sat upright, hands folded loosely now, gaze steady as the miles passed. She looked different. Not stronger, she had always been strong, but more certain. Like surviving the storm had proven something to herself she'd never been allowed to believe. When the ranch finally came into view, she stiffened. The house stood against the white land like a promise made long ago and kept through hardship. Smoke curled faintly from the chimney, proof of life, warmth, continuity. This is it, he said. She nodded, swallowing. It's bigger than I imagined. So was the storm, he replied gently. Inside the house was cold but intact. Caleb set about building a fire while she lingered in the doorway, uncertain now that the rules of survival no longer erased expectation. This wasn't a station. This was a home. His home. And maybe, if she chose, hers. When the fire finally caught and warmth crept back into the room, Caleb turned to her fully for the first time since they'd arrived. Not guarded. Not defensive. I owe you more than an apology, he said. She waited. Didn't interrupt. Didn't brace. I brought you into this thinking only of what I needed. The storm showed me what I almost threw away. Her eyes searched his face, wary but open. I don't need promises, she said quietly. I've lived on less. I know, he replied. That's why I won't give you empty ones. He took a breath. The hardest part was next. You can leave. The words hung between them, heavy and deliberate. When the road's clear fully, I'll help you go anywhere you choose. Or, you can stay. Not because you were chosen out of necessity, but because I am choosing you now. Tears welled in her eyes. Not from fear this time. Relief. I was afraid, she admitted, voice unsteady, that once the storm ended, everything good would end with it. He shook his head. The storm didn't create what happened between us. It revealed it. She stepped closer. Hesitant. Then braver. If I stay, she said, I won't be quiet. I won't shrink myself to fit what you expect. A corner of his mouth lifted. I don't want quiet. I want honest. And I don't want you smaller. I want you here. She nodded slowly, the decision settling into her bones. Then I'll stay. The days that followed were not perfect. There were awkward moments. Who slept where, who cooked what, silences that needed time rather than words. Caleb learned she talked to herself while working. She learned he forgot meals when focused. Once she burned the bread. He ate it anyway. Is it terrible? She asked, watching him carefully. He chewed, thoughtful. I've had worse. She raised an eyebrow. That wasn't the question. He smiled. Then yes, but I'll survive. She laughed. A real laugh. Soft, surprised, like she hadn't expected it from herself. Winter loosened its grip inch by inch. Snow melted. Fences were rebuilt. Chores became routines, routines became shared. One evening, as they stood watching the sun dip low over land once buried in white, she spoke quietly. Do you still regret choosing me? He didn't hesitate. No. I regret not seeing you sooner. She smiled fully then. Without reservation. The storm of 1885 became more than survival. It became the turning point of two lives that had nearly passed each other by. And if this story left you feeling warm, safe, quietly hopeful, stay with us. Subscribe for more Wild West tales where hardship doesn't harden hearts, it reveals them. Indeed.